how would you describe the current legacy of Prime Minister Djindjic? What is his legacy? What does Zoran Djindjic mean when somebody says his name in Serbia?
I would say Djindjic's legacy is quite strong in Serbia. He was the architect of the regime change in 2000 when the citizens of Serbia deposed dictator Slobodan Milosevic and entered this path of EU accession, opening towards the West, creating a democratic society. And even though we see that in the last several years the trends have been largely negative, I would say that Djindjic still remains a symbol of that change and all the positive developments which cannot be undone so easily. So his legacy remains strong, and he has become in a way a half mythological creature where people are literally bragging about knowing him while he was still alive. And when we actually look at the time when he was in politics and later when he was the prime minister, he was not really a popular figure, and he was quite often criticized by many who would later basically see him as a legend.
Mm-hmm. When we consider that the current government, SNS and the ruling party and President Aleksandar Vučić often tended to use Djindjic's legacy and Djindjic politics as a way to promote their own pro-European, pro-Western politics, isn't this a bit of a contradictory to what Djindjic's legacy actually is?
So, despite several negative trends, Djindjic's legacy cannot be undermined so easily. Some of the things that have been achieved in 2000 are simply irreversible. Serbia is now a country which is at least formally on the path towards EU accession, is formally at least a democratic country, and a country which basically remains on good terms with most of its neighbors and the Western world, and belongs to Europe in a way, belongs to the European family of countries. And in that sense, his legacy cannot be tarnished or removed just due to the fact that some of the political actors who were there in 2000 have come back in power, and that many of the negative phenomena we could have seen in Serbia in the 90s are now back. Still, the main trajectory remains the one which Djindjic has launched. Not only him, of course, but he was, I would say, not only a former leader of the democratic opposition of Serbia, but also a person who is a symbol of that change.
Mm-hmm. Now when we look to the young people and to the young generations which was raised in the last 20 years since Zoran Djindjic was assassinated, what do you think, what is their opinion about Zoran Djindjic? Do they even know about Djindjic? How are they aware of those times in this politics? And how can those times and his legacy be used for future generations and the future establishing of a democratic system in Serbia?
I believe that young people cannot really comprehend the role of Zoran Djindjic in Serbian politics because the revolution of the 5th October 2000 has been painted in the public discourse in the last several years as a negative, as something negative, something which was basically about stealing chairs from the parliament and not removing an authoritarian regime. There is now this narrative that actually the 90s were a period of prosperity, and that the crisis began after Milosevic was removed and after Djindjic became prime minister, and then that this basically negative trajectory lasted until 2012. In this narrative, it is impossible to understand the importance of the revolution of 5th October 2000, and impossible to understand what did Djindjic mean for Serbia in only these a bit more than 2 very brief years while he was the prime minister of Serbia.
So for the youth, we can summarize that he is not playing a huge or important role nowadays for the active youth in Serbia.
His name is certainly something well known to everyone now in Serbia, including those who haven't been born at the time when he was the prime minister. Mm-hmm. But that still does not mean that they actually understand what was his role, what was his achievement, and why it is important, or at least it should be important, to cherish his legacy and not let it be forgotten, because everything that Zoran Djindjic stood for, everything he fought for, these are the same issues which we are fighting today in Serbia. And in that sense, definitely the image of Zoran Djindjic should be, I would say, a bit more present in public discourse.
Mm-hmm. So now to conclude this interview, when you look into like 5 years or 10 years in the future of this country and Serbia, do you see an ending of this long transition period from an autocratic to a democratic system, or what do you see?
Serbia was on a trajectory towards consolidated democracy from 2000 until 2012 or 14, because we had several government changes when the government which was in power went to the opposition and vice versa, and these were all peaceful transitions of power, which proved in a way that Serbia is on an irreversible path towards becoming a fully democratic state. However, in the last several years, we see that it does not seem that this current government would accept so easily such a government change, and it actually allows the opposition breathing space and the conditions in which a opposition can be victorious, which is one of the main preconditions for having a democracy, not only on paper, but in essence.